Hello everyone, good day. For this video, we are going to be talking about sex, gender, and sexuality. And we're also going to talk about SOGIE, sexual orientation, gender, identity, and expression. So this topic is still under module number 1, Introduction to the Course and the Concepts, and the learning outcomes for this module is to discuss concepts and perspectives that are useful in the study of gender and multiculturalism based on different intersectional frameworks. And the problem question that we are going to answer in this specific module is, what are the key concepts that I need to learn in order for me to explore all forms of marginalization? And for this specific topic or this specific video, we are going to talk about the concepts of sex and gender. In our everyday lives as individuals living in society, living in our communities, living in our families, living in our schools, we may not know it or we may not feel it, but in many ways, gender matters. And the way we live our lives, our restrictions, our limitations, our opportunities are shaped by the gendered structures that are found in our society. So before getting into the different nuances of these concepts, let's talk about their key definitions first. So let's talk about sex. Oftentimes when we use the word sex, we refer to the act of sex or sexual activity or being intimate with another person. But for this topic, we'll talk about sex as in a characteristic of human beings. So sex is defined as the distinguishing characteristics which include chromosomal differences. We have learned in our biology classes that this biological sex is determined by the 23rd pair of chromosomes in a given individual. So if the person has a double X, then that person is a female, and if it's XY, then that person is biologically male. Other distinguishing characteristics that point to sex are external and internal sexual structures. And of course, this is what you see in the pictures in the slides. Of course, males are identified by their external sexual genitalia, and these are the penis and the testes. And for the females, it's the external sexual genitalia is your vagina, and your labia minora, labia majora, etc., etc. And then also we have the internal sexual structures or the internal reproductive system organs, like for example for males it's of course your testes, and then for the females you have your ovaries, your fallopian tube, your uterus, your cervix. Another defining characteristic that makes up sex is hormonal production. So usually males, we attribute higher testosterone levels for males, and for females, we attribute higher estrogen levels. Progesterone is high, that specific hormone is high during pregnancy. So estrogen is the hormone of woman, and the progesterone is the hormone of mother. And also, sex can be identified based on physiological differences and secondary sex characteristics. So for the secondary sex characteristics of males, of course, we have bigger bones, broader shoulders, more tapered waist. We have lower voice register. We have more body hair and a different type of body scent compared to females. And of course, females have wider hips. They have more narrow waist. They have a more high-tuned voice, and then they also have lesser body hair. And of course, a very defining feature of a secondary sex characteristics that's attributed to females is, of course, the breasts, So yon. Although males also have the breasts, but mas madami ang breast tissue ng mga babae. And of course, they have more mammary glands than males. Now, in all living creatures, or in most living creatures, we see what we call sexual dimorphism, or a distinction in a certain living creature that assigns a certain creature as male or female. Like for example, in the birds that we are seeing in this picture, they belong to the same species, but the gray one is male and the more colorful one is female. So, Generally, sexual dimorphism talks about the biological fact that makes up what males and females are. In all living creatures, humans included, there are, obvious differences in the bodily makeup of living creatures, males compared to females, no? So genetically and physically, there is that biological difference of what males and females are made up of. And as I've explained earlier, one of the key features that differentiates a male person and a female person is the 23rd pair of chromosomes, in males having the XY chromosome and the females having the XX chromosome. Now, the one way that we have built this world in terms of society is that we think of binaries, no? And one of the biggest binary thinkings that we have in our society is the difference between male and female. But what if there are sex characteristics that do not completely conform to males and females in terms of biology? For instance, 2% of all live births, infants cannot be easily categorized as male or female because of some discrepancies in relation to the sex characteristics that they are born with. For example, they don't have an XX or an XY chromosome. Like for example, there are those who are missing one chromosome, may XXY, may XYY, at meron ding YY. Some people have Down syndrome, which are also chromosomal anomalies. We also have people with Klinefelter syndrome, which are also chromosomal anomalies. And when you look into males being XY and females being XX, where do they fit? And of course, we have external genitalia, no? Parehong merong external genitalia, meron siyang penis, meron din siyang vagina. What happens when that is present in a certain individual? And of course, the internal reproductive system. So when these sex characteristics are indistinct, they do not fit the standards of being solely male or female, we call them intersex persons. No, we used to call them hermaphrodite, but that is no longer a politically correct way of calling people with these conditions. We call them intersex individuals, and 2% of live births fall under the category of intersex. This right here in the left side of the slide is the official flag of the intersex peoples. So even in the most basic sense of sex characteristics, there's already discriminatory practices that are attached to it. For instance, intersexuality is treated as a correctable birth defect as compared to something that you are naturally born with. So some intersex individuals are forced to go into complicated surgeries and are performed to match a particular sex category. So since most of our legal systems do not have an intersex category in terms of, the sex assignments, the tendency is to push intersex people to identify with just one sex. When they're old enough and we already identify which hormone is more dominant in an individual, then we say, sige, you are a male. Or we say that you are a female. So we cut or we surgically remove your penis and you're now a female. But that is an erasure of the intersex identity. It means that intersex identities, because of their minority status, are immediately painted as abnormal, as abominations. And it seems like when you are born intersex, your humanity is lessened unless you are medically, put into a valid sex category of male and female. So in that specific sex category, wherein the line between male and sex is not clear for intersex people, they already experience societal discrimination or structural discrimination by the virtue of, sexual categories in legal systems not already available for them. So what are the sources of stigma for intersex people? Physical integrity and bodily autonomy. Because, what if people want to maintain their intersex identity? But society says no, but you have to choose one. You have to be male or you have to be female. We have a doctor who will be able to identify which hormones are higher with you. If it's testosterone, you're male. If it's estrogen, you're female, and then you can go decide which one you are in that spectrum. And then we surgically remove the other sexual organ. But what if a certain person wants to maintain an intersex identity? Can we offer an intersex identity in our legal documents? No. So that's a form of discrimination that's common among intersex people. And then, of course, since they're minority, one of the discriminatory practices that they experience is medical photography and display without their consent. No? Because they're seen as rarities in the medical field. They're usually regarded as case studies, and then usually, consultants would call on their residents and then watch, as they do gender corrective surgeries on these intersex individuals for learning purposes without the consent of the person. Usually kasi they do this around age of minority pa lang, no? So their ability to give consent is not that fully formed yet. So, and then again, also access to medical services for those who choose to maintain their intersexuality. There are not many medical facilities that cater to the needs of intersex people, just in case they stay intersex, based on their own decision making. So these are societal discriminatory practices that is experienced by intersex people. Now let's look at gender. Now, sex, gender, they are usually used interchangeably when they should not be used interchangeably. Sex is highly defined by biological characteristics, chromosomes, sexual organs, sexual hormones. But gender is more social, no? The first one talks about your maleness and your femaleness. This one talks about your womanness and your manness. This talks about your boyhood and your girlhood. Here are some definitions of gender. These are psychological, social, and cultural aspects of maleness and femaleness. So this talks about, what society attributes to persons who are male and persons who are female, and how a man should act and be in a given society, and how a female should act and be in a given society. Another definition would be that gender is a system of social practices that creates and maintains gender distinctions, and it organizes relations of inequality based on these distinctions. No? So if you're a more critical definition of gender is this. But of course, gender encompasses a lot of things. No? It talks about gender identity, the extent to which you identify if you're male or female or agender or non-binary. It also talks about gender expressions, the extent to which you behave feminine or masculine. Gender also a little bit encroaches upon sexuality, the genders of the people who you want to lay in bed with or be romantic with or be intimate with. So this all are influenced by gender. This is all of these concepts are under the big umbrella term of gender. Also, it's important for us to define sexuality, and sexuality talks about our individual patterns and social practices encompassing sexual desires, romantic desires, emotional connections, and the behavior that comes with them. So basically, this is related to who we love and who we lay in bed with, or who we have sex with, or who we have romantic and intimate relations with. And we know that sexuality, while a lot of it is individual, it is also very social. And later on, we will also learn that there are many forms of sexuality. And you may have heard of some modes of sexuality already, like heterosexuality, bisexuality, homosexuality. But there's so much more, and we'll discuss that in a while. But in our society, there's one mode or there's one type of sexuality that is regarded as quote-unquote normal in our society. And that is heteronormativity. Heteronormativity is the prevailing ideology that heterosexuality or a romantic and sexual attraction to the opposite sex is the only normal sexual orientation that's acceptable in most societies. So, in countries just like in the Philippines, this is the reason why same-sex marriage is still not accepted, in certain societies. This is the reason why when two men or two women, declare their love for each other, they're shunned by society, they are welcomed by a lot of discriminatory remarks, but also experience a lot of state-sponsored discrimination, like for example, not being able to extend your estate to your partner because you are not legally married to that person. So these are heteronormative structures that maintain the oppression and disadvantage against those who are non-heterosexuals. This is also the reason why there are those gay or lesbian couples wherein you identify, sino sa inyo yung boy or sino yung girl sa relationship. Asking that is still also an heteronormative practice. Kasi why does there have to be a guy and a girl in a relationship that's same sex anyways? Right? So that type of thinking or ideology that we push among people who are, in same-sex unions is a form of heteronormativity because we are only validating their same-sex union when somebody identifies as a husband and a wife in a relationship. And heteronormativity as a sexual ideology is a way that sex and gender are used to hierarchically organize people in our society and perpetuates gender binary. And also, as explained, heteronormativity also perpetuates gender binary. And, in a forward way of thinking at gender, we don't think of genders as, strictly two categories that you have to fit in. Male, female, heterosexual, homosexual. It's not just that, Gender, in a more forward way of thinking, is more of a spectrum. And we'll talk about that when we get into the next part of this lesson. Now, it's time for us to talk about the LGBTQIA plus community. So, of course, it started off as just LGBT, but of course, we are trying to give more spaces to other forms of gender identities and sexual identities, and that's the reason why we have more letters in this community now. So, what does LGBTQIA plus mean? L is lesbian, G is gay, B is bisexual, T is trans, Q is queer, I is intersex, remember our earlier discussion, and A is asexual or ace. And then the plus is for the future types of sexual and gender identities that are valid but are still not part of these letter sets. And of course, generally, the identifying symbol for the LGBTQIA community is the rainbow flag. But of course, usually it's used in the gay communities and other communities, other specific sexual and gender identities have their own flags. And I'm going to introduce to you the flags as well. Now, in the field of gender studies, you will hear the abbreviation SOGIE. So what does SOGIE mean? SOGIE means sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. In some books, they call it SOGIE SC. So SOGIE SC is sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sexual characteristics. Sexual characteristics yung kanina pinag-usapan natin. The biological male, biological female, and the intersex people who have both characteristics. Now, a widely used framework to be able to identify your own SOGIE is the use of the gingerbread person. And the gingerbread person has been coined by Sam Killerman. And this is a very good framework, a very easy to understand framework for us to be able to map ourselves in terms of our gender identity, expression, sexual characteristics, and sexual desires. And basically, the understanding here is that gender is not a binary, rather a continuum. And remember, gender identity, expression, sexual desires also change across time. Some people start up as being bi-curious or questioning, and then eventually they become bisexual, or probably they become pansexual. So there's so many things that we will be discussing here. So I want you to be prepared with all of the new terms that you might be able to come across in this discussion. So there are four main constructs of the genderbread person, which can help you locate yourself in terms of the sexual and gender spectrum. The first one is the biological sex, male or female. This is based on your genitalia and your chromosomes and your sex hormones. And then we also have your gender identity. Your gender identity is the extent to which you believe that you are a man, you are a woman, you are both, or you're neither. And then we also have sexual attraction, which talks about the extent you have sexual or romantic desires with another person, and also the gender and the sex of the person that you're attracted to sexually and romantically, or just romantically, or nothing at all. And then we also have gender expression, which basically talks about the extent to which we are feminine, masculine, both, or neutral in the way we behave. So, yun siya. So, again, the four dimensions or constructs of the gingerbread person: biological sex, gender identity, sexual attraction, and gender expression. And we'll go through them one by one. Now, biological sex is the physical sex characteristics that you're born with and develop, including your genitalia, your penis or your vagina, your body shape, your secondary sex characteristic, your voice, your pitch, body hair, hormones, chromosomes. And what we ask here is the extent of your femaleness and your maleness. So, of course, some people biologically are female. And there are those people who are biologically male. But there are also people who are both, and they're intersex. There are also people who are in the middle of their sex reassignment surgery. Wala pa silang sex reassignment surgery. Some of them have male characteristics but also female characteristics. So for example, the M to F, or the male to female, yung mga they already take their hormones, they already have breasts, but they haven't surgically removed the penis yet. So that's an example of, biological sex that are both present in an individual. And then the second dimension or construct of the gingerbread person is gender identity. So gender identity is how you in your head define your gender based on how much you align or don't align with what you understand to be options for gender. So we're looking at your womanness and your manness. So there are persons who just identify themselves as women, and there are those persons who identify themselves as men. There are also those persons who identify that they have both womanness and manness in their persona. And in some indigenous peoples, we call them two-spirit people. Ibig sabihin, they possess manness and womanness at the same time. Some indigenous peoples in Canada are like that. Some Aboriginal peoples in Australia also have two-spirit peoples. And you also have genderqueer people. And genderqueer people feel like they do not have a specific gender. It can change through time. Some people call themselves non-binary, meaning they do not want to be fitting into a male or female. There are certain people who are agender, meaning, they don't have a gender. So these are genderqueer. So an example of a popular person who identifies to be genderqueer or non, under that umbrella is non-binary, is Sam Smith. He just they came out as I think last year. They came out as genderqueer, non-binary. Now, what makes a transgender identity? You might probably have heard of trans people or transgender men, transgender women. What makes a certain person transgender? By the way, what I'm showing you here is the official flag of trans individuals. So, ito yung flag nila. Okay, so let's get into the many concepts in relation to being cis or being trans. So let's define first what cisgender means. Cisgender is a gender identity wherein the gender identity is aligned with the biological sex of a person. So for example, you have male genitalia and you identify as a man, then you are a cisgender man. Or if you have female genitalia and you identify as female or woman, then you are cisgender. So it's usually when your biological sex is aligned with your gender identity. And cisgender identity is usually what is considered normal in a heteronormative framework. And therefore, we don't question being cis because that is kind of what is socially constructed as normal in our society. Now, in some conversations, you'll be coming across the term cishet or cisgender heterosexual. So this is a certain cisgender person who is also at the same time heterosexual. So in the hierarchy of sexual and gender identities, these are kind of the topmost in terms of the social hierarchies in the heteronormative ideas because, what is accepted in our society is that if you have a female genitalia, you have to identify as a woman and love a man. Or if you have a male genitalia, you have to identify as a man and love a woman. So these are cisgender heterosexual individuals. Because there's also cisgender individuals who are also homosexual or bisexual. So these are men who have male genitalia but are sexually attracted to other men. So that is homosexuality, or if it's both sexes or other sexes, then that's bisexuality. So hindi siya cishet. No? Cisgender siya, homosexual. So magkaiba yon. Now, you will come across also terms like cissexism or cisnormativity, and basically this is the ideology that puts cisgender identities as the normal social identity for gender identities, and the cisnormativity also introduces discrimination against those who do not conform cisgender identities. And the actual actions or beliefs that trans people are not acceptable in society or are abnormal is called transphobia. And therefore, we go to the term that we have to define, and that's transgender. So transgender is when your physical sexual characteristics, like your genitalia, is not aligned with your gender identity. So for example, you were born female and you identify as male, and you can be considered as trans. And if you were born male and you identify as female, then you can be considered transgender. So if there is not an alignment of your physical genitalia, or your physical sex characteristics, and your gender identity, that is possibly transgender. Now, what is the difference between transsexual and transgender? Some books or some sources would say that transsexual is under the bigger umbrella of transgender. Transsexual people are those who undergo sex reassignment surgery for them to be able to align their biological sex characteristics with their gender identity. So, sir, does that mean that if I don't undergo sex reassignment surgery to match my genitalia and my body characteristics with my gender identity, do I still identify as transgender? Yes, transgender does not require you to have sex reassignment surgery or hormone therapy to be existent, because those people who are in transitioning but have a misalignment of their gender identity and their biological sex, they are still considered as transgender individuals. And then the term transvestite is a politically backward term. It's not a politically correct term to call people who are transgender or transsexual. So it's used to be a term that has been used before, but now we shouldn't be using that because that's not politically correct. Now, we also have the term called gender dysphoria. And gender dysphoria used to be a psychological illness that results from the stress that a certain person has when the person has a misalignment in terms of bodily sex characteristics and gender identity. It used to be part of the mental illnesses, but the American Psychological Association has removed gender dysphoria from their list of psychiatric illnesses because, again, it's gender dysphoria, or that feeling of being transgender, should not be medicalized that way. No, because if you say that something is an illness, then it will invite so many stigma. So it was removed. No, and gender dysphoria is no longer a psychological or a psychiatric condition. So another term that you might come across with when we're talking about trans issues is the term transitioning. Transitioning means this is the process wherein trans individuals try to make their body characteristics aligned with their gender identity. So there are many ways that trans people get to transition. One of them is hormone therapy. So if you are a transgender man and if you want your bodily characteristics to be that of a male, then you take testosterone. And then also for trans women, you want your bodily characteristics to be aligned with your female identity, you take hormone replacement therapy such as estrogen. Transitioning can also mean surgical intervention. So for females who would, for female bodies with male gender identities, usually they do mastectomy, they remove the breasts, and also surgically reassign their genitalia from vagina to penis. And then of course for males who want to transition to females, of course they change yung kanilang male genitalia into a female genitalia. So this is transitioning. Now, for a transgender identity, it doesn't require for a certain person to transition in order for that person to have that identity. Okay? Whether or not there's no transition, there is an incomplete transition or a full translation of male to female or female to male, that person still belongs to a transgender identity. So for instance, a trans woman takes hormone replacement therapy but decides not to do genitalia removal and replacement into a vagina. That does not make that person less of a transgender woman. The person is still transgender woman, pero that person didn't get into a full transitional phase. Okay? And a person who, for example, hindi aligned ang kanyang sex characteristics with the gender identity, didn't go for hormone therapy, didn't go for any surgical intervention, the person is still within transgender identity. Also, in discussing transgender issues, you may also come across the term dead naming. So what does dead naming mean? Dead naming example would be if I call Jake Zyrus as Charis Pempenko, then that is dead naming. If I call the person or regard the person based on the name that was provided to the person prior to the transgender identity, that is called dead naming. Now, there's also what we call genderqueer identities. It's an umbrella of identities which denotes or relates to persons who do not subscribe to conventional gender distinctions but identifies with neither, both, or a combination of male and female genders. So under the genderqueer umbrella, we have the non-binary gender, or those who do not conform with being males or females. We also have under that umbrella the agender people, those who do not identify as either male or female. We also have bigender people. Bigender people are those who identify both male and female at the same time. And we have gender fluid people, which is they can change their gender identities across time. So this is a general umbrella for genderqueer people. Now, one of the criticisms against the SOGIE framework is that SOGIE is very Western leaning. It tries to impose its idea of gender and sexualities on all cultures. Well, in fact, some other cultures like the Philippines and other indigenous cultures, they have their own framework of understanding gender and sexuality, and that's why in its goal to become more progressive and more inclusive in terms of how sex and gender could be understood in a more global scale, transgender issues also include cultural categories of sex and gender, such as, for example, the two-spirit people, which are found in Canada. So again, the two-spirit people is sometimes put under the umbrella of genderqueer, but two-spirit people says, no, we are our own identity, and two-spirit people is a gender category among indigenous peoples in Canada, wherein they have both the spirit of being male or female. And then also in Indonesia, they have the Bugis people, and the Bugis people doesn't have like the two gender thingy. No, they actually have 5 genders, and each gender again has a place in the social hierarchy of the society in the indigenous people of Bugis in Indonesia. And then also in the Philippines, we have the Babaylan, and the Babaylan are people in our pre-colonial history, and these people, they are believed to be blessed by God because the Babaylans were thought to have both the spirit of a female and the spirit of the male, and there were in the social hierarchy, Babaylans were revered as gifted by God, so they were assigned with higher roles in society. And this is one of the things that the LGBT community in the Philippines laments in our current modern times. That in the pre-colonial era, we were very accepting, and we even revere highly those people whose gender identities aren't as heteronormative as we know now in our current state. And because we had been colonized and we had been socialized into the Christian and American way of living, suddenly these identities were slowly erased from our roots, and they were replaced and they were discriminated against because of that. And this goes to show, and it's another demonstration of how gender identities are actually socially constructed, because in history pre-colonial, these types of gender identities that do not fit the male and female mold are actually put high in society. So there. Now in this picture, you see famous trans people, no? And of course we have Caitlyn Jenner here, and we also have Angie Mead-King from the Philippines. And if you notice, they remain coupled with their female partners. So the question is, do you remain as a trans woman if you are still in love with your wife? And my answer to that is yes. Trans identity is not based on your sexual attraction. Okay? The trans identity is based on the alignment of your gender identity with sex characteristics. Later on, we will learn in the SOGIE framework of genderbread person that sexual attraction is another construct of gender, of the whole SOGIE. So, but for trans individuals, it doesn't matter who you love or who you lay in bed with. What matters in terms of identifying whether you're trans, you're cis, you're genderqueer, or whatever, in terms of gender identity, is the alignment of your gender identity with your physical genitalia. Now, one of the bigger issues in relation to trans identities is what pronouns to use. Again, at the end of the day, kaya in the introduction, I ask you, what is your preferred pronouns? At the end of the day, it's the person who says what is the most fitting pronoun for that person. Okay? So this, of course, we have the she for those who have female gender identities. We have he for those who have male gender identities. And we have they, which is a gender neutral term we can apply to everyone. But usually for those who are genderqueer and non-binary, they prefer to be called they. And there are also other new pronouns like ze or he or here or here or air, but isn't as mainstream as they, no? And remember also in the American Psychological Association writing manual, APA 7, they are more keen in terms of using the gender-neutral pronoun of they kahit singular pa ito, no? So the introduction of singular they is for gender neutrality, for gender sensitivity. So in our papers, we use that. Instead of saying he/her or his/her or he/she, we use the single or the plural they. So we discussed about the first construct of the genderbread person, which is sex characteristics, which is based on your biological sex. And then we also have gender identity, what gender do you believe you are. Now we go to the third construct, which is sexual orientation. Now, there are two components of sexual orientation. We have sexual attraction and romantic attraction. So why are we differentiating that? Why are we differentiating sexual from romantic attraction? I'll explain later. Okay, so let's look into this. So if I am male, for instance, okay, and I am attracted to women, for example, I'm here, and I'm not attracted to men, then I am a heterosexual, or simply straight. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Next, if I am male and I am not attracted to women and I am attracted to men, then I am considered homosexual or simply gay. Okay? And if you're female and you are exclusively sexually attracted to women and not attracted to men, then you are also homosexual, but the more acceptable term or less scientific term for that is lesbian, of course. Next, if I am male and I am attracted to women and I'm also attracted to men, regardless of the extent, then I can be considered as bi or bisexual. Okay? So again, bisexual is not kailangan pantay na pantay ang iyong attraction sa magkaibang sex. No, it means that you have attraction for both sexes regardless of extent and regardless of whether you really had a relationship with them. You're not a complete bisexual if only you've had relationships with them. I know some people who maintain their relationship with their opposite sex but are still in tune with their bisexuality, even if they did not have any relation with the same sex. So there. What if I'm male and I'm not attracted to women and I'm not attracted to men? I am considered asexual or simply ace. So there are people who by choice or really just by biology, they really don't have any sexual preference for any type of sex. Some people just don't like the idea of sex at all. And that's the reason we have also romantic attraction in the picture. Because there are ace people who are still capable of having romantic feelings even if they don't have sexual feelings. So, ganun din, if I'm a male asexual and I only like women, then I am considered as an asexual heteronomatic. Okay? And, for example, I am a male who exclusively just likes men, then I am an asexual homoromantic. And there are also people who like both. So, tawag sa kanila, biromantic. Okay? And there are also people who do not have the capacity or the choice to be romantically involved with any sex. They're called aromantic people. Okay? So there are people who are asexual but can be romantic, and there are those people who are both asexual and aromantic. Okay? Now, there is a measurement called a Kinsey Scale, and this basically looks into the spectrum of homosexuality, bisexuality, and heterosexuality. So you answer that scale, and then you will get a final score of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And if you get 0, then you are exclusively heterosexual. And if you get 6, you are exclusively homosexual. And anything in between. So if your Kinsey scale is 1 to 5, you are considered bisexual. Okay? Pero you are only considered heterosexual kung 0 ang score mo. And then you're considered homosexual if you're 6. Okay, so before we get into the terms, let me just present you with the flags. This flag is the lesbian pride flag. And then this one is the bisexual flag. And the third one is the pansexual flag. And the last one is the asexual flag. Okay, so let's get into the terms. First, homophobia. I think everybody knows this. These are any form of stigma and discrimination targeting homosexual identities. Biphobia is any form of stigma and discrimination targeting bisexual identities. The most common form of biphobia is called bi-erasure. Bi-erasure means this is the unconscious or conscious disregard for bisexual identities. If you say that bisexuality is just a phase, that is bi-erasure. Or probably you say, oh, you already married someone from the opposite sex, you're no longer bisexual, you're already straight. That's not the point. If the person still feels some sort of attraction for both sexes, it doesn't change whether that person commits to a certain person. Of course, when the person acts out the desire, in a committed relationship, that doesn't make the person bisexual. That makes the person a cheater. Diba? So it doesn't, your sexual identity is not related to you being a cheater. Okay? And isa pa sa mga biphobic statements, no? When a certain person is bisexual, the person is greedy or a cheater or malande, someone who sleeps around. Hindi po yun tama. Desire, if you don't act upon it, doesn't make you malande or haliparot. Okay? And then, usually, this is a common question. What is the difference between bisexual and pansexual? Recently, I've learned that pansexual is under the umbrella of bisexual because now they are defining bisexual as not just, having attraction with two sexes. No, it's more of having attraction to more than one sex or more than one gender. Now, the common form of bisexuality is if you are attracted to maleness or femaleness. But there are people who are attracted to male who are straight, female who are straight. They're also attracted to trans individuals. They are also attracted to non-binary individuals. These people who are attracted to people regardless of the person's SOGIE, that person is called pansexual. The ability to have sexual and romantic people to anyone with any gender. So that's pansexual. Bisexual is having attractions with people having attraction to more than one gender. But pansexual is to all or any gender. Next, we have bi-curious, and bi-curious people are those who are trying to explore and wonder whether they are capable of having desires for people of their same sex, while they are engaged in a desirable relationship with the opposite sex. So, bi-curious, parang nasa exploring stage pa siya. Same with questioning, tinatanong pa niya, he's asking himself or she is asking herself whether or not she's capable of having desires with, the sex that she is not used to be exploring. No? So that's bi-curious and questioning. And then as I explained, asexual people or ace people, they do not have any sexual desires for any gender. But asexual people can be categorized as heteroromantic, homoromantic, biromantic, or if they don't also have romantic feelings, they can be aromantic. I think I've also heard of people who are hetero, homo, or bisexual but are aromantic. They're capable of having sexual feelings with people, but they're not capable of having romantic feelings with people. So there are people who identify as that. And then maybe you've heard of the term polyamory. Polyamory is the type of committed relationship wherein you are romantically involved with more than one person at a time. But it's not necessarily polygamy because polygamy may kinalaman sa legal structures. Polyamory is really your ability to be able to be committed romantically to more than one person at a given time. May mga specific categorizations pa ng polyamory, but if we get into that, medyo it's a whole subject in itself. So that's polyamory. Of course, there are people, most people are considered as monoamorous. Ibig sabihin, they are only identifying as someone who can be committed romantically to a certain person once at a time. And then, of course, there are also people who are aromantic. They don't see themselves to be connected or romantically with another person. Now, one of the burning questions you may have, if a straight man falls in love with a trans woman, does the person become homosexual or heterosexual? In my book, dapat heterosexual. Because if the straight man is in love with the womanness of the person, then opposite yon. So heterosexual siya. Of course, at the end of the day naman kasi, no, I'm going to say this later pa sana, pero bagitin ko na rin ngayon, that when we talk about sexual and gender identities, it is not us who will impose the identity of some other people. We identify our own gender and sexual identities. No, what this subject is teaching you is what are the options and what are the available identities out there, because some people may have certain feelings but they don't, bakit kaya wala akong feelings na sexual towards people, bakit kaya parang hindi naman ako nagkakaroon ng romantic feelings with people, ako ba ay abnormal na tao? SOGIE tells you that no, there's a space for you to exist. No, there are people like you who are aromantic. There are people like you who are asexual. There are people who are like you that are pansexual. And sometimes having a space in the literature, in scholarly work, in these frameworks, validates your existence. And that's why we're having this whole SOGIE discussion. And you may say, ang stressful naman. Ang dami-daming concepts. And I would say, my answer to that is, there is not too many concepts for us to know if we want to be better persons. If you want to be better persons, we have to learn as much as we can so that we can provide safe spaces for people for them to exist. So, yun siya. Next, yung gay ba na category is the same as bakla in the Philippines? And I would say no. Because gay is a sexual orientation category and bakla is both a category that's sexual identity and also gender expression. No? Because some people who identify as gay, who are masculine, won't necessarily want to categorize themselves as bakla. Kasi nga, they don't identify as someone with, kasi bakla usually is attached to feminine activities and feminine behavior and feminine features. We will talk about that in a while. So, no, gay is not equivalent to bakla. Gay is a part of being bakla, but doesn't necessarily encompass the whole category of bakla. Bakla is a cultural category that's specific to the Philippines. Construct number 4 is gender expression. Gender expression is the extent to which we behave based on gender assigned behavior. So there are people who act as feminine. So these are femme people. Those who are more masculine, we have the butch. Okay? And then, there are those people who can be fluid, male, masculine, and feminine. We call them androgynous. And there are people who do not prescribe their behaviors into being female or male. And they're called gender neutral. So again, gender expression is based on how you move, how you talk, the language that you're using, the clothes that you're wearing, the items that you're buying and you're putting on yourself. That is generally considered as feminine or masculine. That is gender expression. Gender expression, dito rin pumapasok yung drag, di ba? For those who are fans of Drag Race, di ba? Drag is a gender expression wherein we exaggerate, how we behave as the opposite sex, which is done by our drag queens and our drag kings, yung mga babae who act as male. And when you see, diba, they really exaggerate the femaleness from the makeup to the way they talk and the way they dance and the way they move, diba? So that is drag. What else are probably some gender expressions that you know? Of course, we have, in terms of the lesbian, diba, we have the lipstick lesbians, diba? The lipstick part, that's the gender expression. These are the lesbians who still are feminine despite being lesbian. We also have the butch lesbians, those who are masculine acting, and the lesbians. And then of course, in the Philippines, isa sa mga sikat nating mga gender expression sa mga straight acting guys na gays ay paminta. Paminta meaning those guys who are attracted to other men who are masculine and are discreet, quote-unquote, no? So, yan ang mga common natin. Borta. Borta is also now known as a gender expression in the Philippines. Those who embody the masculine traits of being muscular and being fitness-related, ganyan. In the Philippines, one of our gender expressions na sikat in the LGBT community is sword speak. Ano yung sword speak? Ito yung gay lingo. Ito yung tinatawag din nating backlist, no? Yes. For example, if it's big, it's Dakota, no? Instead of saying it's raining, you say Jumulanis Morissette. Instead of saying I'm tired, you say Pagoda Wave Tragedy, and then you end everything with charot, chok chak chenes, keme keme. Or if you like something, you say bongga. If you don't like someone, wititit, wale. This is a specific gender subculture of the gays in the Philippines. So yeah, here you see different gay subcultures. No, they're all within the gay umbrella, but they have different gender expressions. Like for example, we have the bears, we have the jocks, we have the gamers, we have the leather people, and they have so many different, gender expressions based on their subcultures. And then ito naman mga lesbian subcultures in terms of gender expression. We have the high femme, the very feminine lesbians, and we have the stone butch lesbians, and then there are those who are in the middle. By the way, also going back here in terms of gender expression, you can be straight and be feminine in terms of gender expression. Your feminine gender expression doesn't decrease your straightness. It shouldn't decrease your straightness, because there are males who identify as males who are heterosexuals but are in touch with their feminine side. So your feminineness, your femininity is not a main ingredient for your heterosexuality or for your maleness. Magkaibang category yon. Okay? And that's the reason why we are advocating the teaching SOGIE. Kasi some people, malambot kumilos, hindi siya masyadong rowdy na lalaki, hindi siya ganon ka-masculine, hindi siya lalaki, hindi siya straight, bakla siya. No, it doesn't necessarily mean that way. That's why the reason that we're having this discussion of SOGIE and we want to mainstream this, so that these types of discrimination, this type of misconceptions, mabura siya sa society, so that people who may be in tune with their feminine side, like for example, males who do ballet, or females who get into contact sports, they don't feel discriminated against for what they like. So yun. Okay, so we go back to the genderbread person. Again, we have 4 constructs. We have sex, expression, attraction, and identity. They are interacting with each other in our lives, but they are different constructs. So hopefully, in this process, you might look into yourself and, identify yourself, which in this spectrum of sex, spectrum of attraction, spectrum of gender identity, and expression you have. So this will probably help you learn and know about yourself more. By the way, it's genderbread, not gingerbread. So typo. Alright, so that's our very long and comprehensive discussions on sex and gender and sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. I'm pretty sure that after this, you're going to have really more questions than answers, and I think that you will have many curious questions. So what I'll do is that you can comment your question in this YouTube video, or in our Canvas account, I'll set up a discussion board there where you can actually ask your questions so that I can be prepared in terms of answering them during our synchronous class. But I hope this was helpful. I hope this opened your eyes to the many colorful identities that are found in our SOGIE framework. And probably, hopefully, what I want you to do here is that, you do some sort of self-introspection and self-reflection. Nasaan ako? Where am I in this sexual map? No? Ano ba ang gender identity ko? Ano ba ang aking sexual orientation? At ano ba ang aking gender expression? Probably some of you are in the verge of, I don't really identify as male and I don't identify as female exclusively. I feel like I identify as someone who can be both. And probably after this, you're learning this, you may consider that maybe you're genderqueer, maybe you're non-binary, or probably you start asking yourself, kaya pala hindi ako nakakaramdam ng sexual desire sa isang tao. There is actually a social category for me that I belong in. Hindi ako abnormal. And people like me exist. Maybe I am asexual. Maybe I'm an aromantic. I like to love, and I think I'm capable of loving more than one person at a given time. Maybe I'm polyamorous, But of course, especially in the very, wide spectrum of the LGBT community, the level of tolerance that society has is different. Like, for example, you would expect that someone who's masculine and gay would have more or who have more or less discrimination, but we have more discrimination for those who are feminine acting gays. And you can just imagine, what if you come out as polyamorous in the Philippines, or what if you come out as asexual or aromantic in the Philippines? It's something that people haven't heard before. So you may experience sort of, more discrimination than the other identities within the spectrum. So we learn about how our discrimination and how our social positions are different in this sea of sexualities, and how our different social contexts may improve or put us in a disadvantage when we talk about intersectionality next week. So I'm talking too much because I really love this subject. I really love this specific topic, and I hope you learned a lot from it. So see you next week.